So D&D is a game that I'm sure many of us have heard about before, or perhaps even played before. Or maybe you listen to a podcast of your favorite D&D nerds getting together every Thursday night and playing the game to their heart's content. Regardless of how you've heard about D&D though, I'd be willing to wager that you have at least thought at some point, hey, this would make a really good video game. Someone should do that. Imagine if someone were able to capture a little bit of the magic that is created during a D&D session and then transfer that into a video game format. That would be really freaking cool, right? Well, fear not, intrepid adventurer, because someone has finally managed to do just that. Someone has finally managed to capture what D&D is, the essence of D&D, and make a beautiful video game out of it, and that video game is Baldur's Gate 3 by Larian Studios. Larian Studios has made what I believe to be a true masterpiece of a video game with D&D at its heart. The amount of polished and detailed storytelling and exemplary gameplay that Baldur's Gate 3 has is absolutely astonishing. But before we get into the juicy details of the video, hello everyone, my name is Nate Munn, and I'm a Baldur's Gate 3 addict. Baldur's Gate 3 has absolutely consumed my free time recently, and as someone who has roughly around 80 or so hours in the game just on my first playthrough alone, I think that I can give the game a proper review. In this video, we're going to be talking about everything that makes Baldur's Gate 3 so amazing. Specifically, we're going to be talking about everything from the NPCs to the campaign, to the gameplay, to the sound effects, to the visuals, to the music, everything that culminates together to create this fantastic storytelling RPG video game that many people consider to be a masterpiece. So, without further ado, let's...
Hello again, everyone. It is I, cautious disclaimer to the wary. If you have not played Baldur's Gate 3, or if you do not want the game to be spoiled, then be warned that this video contains information and clips from the video game that some people could consider to be spoilers. But I've delayed him and you long enough, so let's resume the video.
Begin. Oh, son of a bitch. Wizard. Whatever. Anyways, let's begin by talking about one of the biggest parts of Baldur's Gate 3, the story. And for clarification, I won't be covering every single act of the video game in detail. I'll just be going over the entire story generally so as to prevent any major spoilers for those of you out there who haven't quite completed the story yet, or who are still progressing through the campaign, or perhaps who haven't even played the game yet. So the game has 3 acts, and each act has its own map that's jam-packed with side quests, extensive dungeons, fun encounters, and, of course, legendary loot.
Clown Man is dead. Oh well. Want a treato?
Generally, each act took me about 25-ish hours to complete, but let's start from the beginning. Right off the bat, the game captures your attention by showing you this strange alien creature that infects you and a woman with a tadpole. It then shows you this awesome cutscene of these strange dragon riders attacking the ship, and they look kinda similar to the strange woman in one of the pods. Are they friend? Foe? Why were they attacking the ship to begin with? Are they trying to save you, or are they trying to kill you? And what the hell was that thing that got sucked into your eyeball? Immediately, the game poses a lot of great questions to you as the player and does a beautiful job of hooking your attention. But right as you begin to ask these questions, it throws you right into gameplay and lets you explore the world you just entered. But not before escaping a strange alien ship that's being assaulted by dragons and demons, of course. And for you D&D nerds out there, perhaps you shared in my absolute astonishment and bewilderment when you got thrown right into the game and the first monsters that you fight are mind flayers and demons, which are not beginner level monsters to say the least. But anyways, you go through the non-Lloyd and eventually escape Avernus, but the ship crash lands on the material plane and you're left to pick up the pieces and try to put together what the hell just happened. You're then given the complete freedom to explore around the crash site and to try to find more survivors or information about your captors or whatever the hell was put in your brain, or you can say, fuck that and get as far away from the crash site as possible. But what I love the most about Baldur's Gate 3 is that right from the get-go, it gives you as the player complete autonomy when it comes to your own decisions. It doesn't try to force you down one path or the other, it just throws you into the world and says, hey, make your own decisions and let's see where the story takes us. The game leaves it up to you to make your own decisions and to choose your own path. And let me tell you, there are many paths to choose from. And that is something that makes this game especially addicting because it captures a portion of that feeling of limitless freedom of choice that dungeon masters give to their players when playing a TTRPG like D&D. On top of that, the amount of dialogue options that they give you always feels satisfying. There were little to no times during my playthrough when I felt like I needed more options in regards to things I could say to the NPC I was currently talking to. And if I ever got upset at what an NPC was saying to me, or I got frustrated with a conversation or whatever, combat was always an option. But something that I especially think Larian Studios did wonderfully when it comes to Baldur's Gate 3's dialogue is that your choices don't feel meaningless. Every single time you talk to an NPC, they're trying to convey some sort of important information to you regarding perhaps the encounter or the campaign overall, or maybe just your relationship with them in the game. It never really felt like, or at least in my experience, that whenever you were talking to an NPC, all of the dialogue choices were just useless, and the fact they never really gave you information or weren't that interesting. And something else that's really cool is that not all dialogue options are available to every single player. Some dialogue options are exclusive to certain classes or backgrounds, and other options are locked behind a D20 ability or skill check. This makes your story or gameplay experience feel extremely unique and catered to whatever kind of playstyle or experience you're going for. These D20 skill checks are a core part of what makes D&D such a fantastic game, and Larian Studios has done an exemplary job of integrating that system into Baldur's Gate 3. By bringing the D20 system into dialogue options and the actions you take while exploring the world, it rewards players for choosing a certain character build, and it gives you an addicting sense of achievement each time you roll that D20 and see the big golden letters of success flash across your screen, especially when you're trying to convince someone that you're actually a devil in disguise. This simple yet effective core mechanic that allows you to interact with the world in a very satisfying way, and combined with the amount of dialogue options you get when conversing with pretty much any NPC, elevates the entire story to legendary heights. Never before have I felt as much player agency in a video game than I have felt when playing Baldur's Gate 3. Well, maybe except for Fallout New Vegas or Skyrim. But whether it be trying to intimidate a guard or persuade a devil to join you in the upcoming fight, the options you have during most dialogue encounters are truly insane. The story truly seems to grow and expand as you make more and more decisions in the game, and each time you reach a part of the story when you think you begin to understand what's going on, the game throws another horde of questions at you to answer. Wait, what? Who's that? Who the hell is the Absolute? Am I the Absolute? What happens if I use the Parasite's power? Is Shadowheart a good girl or a bad girl? Like, so many questions to answer all within like the first 20 minutes of playing the game. On top of that, the NPCs and their dialogue options and what they say to you changes depending upon what actions you have taken throughout the campaign. And sometimes they call back and refer to actions you made back in Act 1 in the very beginning of the video game.
You stole an unborn hatchling from my people.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
And this kind of theme persists throughout the entire campaign. Obviously not with every dialogue option, but even still you are always posed with questions that could drastically affect the rest of your playthrough. Do you embrace your role as one of the chosen of the Absolute? Do you believe what one of your companions or an NPC tells you is a cure for your infection? Or do you decide to stand up for someone in need, thus risking yourself? Or perhaps maybe do you decide to adopt an owlbear cub or kill the owlbear cub? These questions and your answers to them is what makes this game so great, and your decisions that you make throughout the campaign sometimes close off certain paths to you and sometimes unlock other ones. All of it is catered to your experience and your specific decisions that you make when you're playing the game, which makes each person's playthrough extremely unique. So for example, I for one thought that Lae'zel was full of shit when she kept on telling me that her people have a cure for this and that all we need to do is find the Githyanki Krish and we'll be cured. So I ignored that plot point for a while until eventually I came across that cutscene when the Githyanki absolutely obliterate all those flaming fists, and then I thought to myself, Okay, yeah, ain't no way in hell I'm gonna be telling these people that I have a freaking Mindfarer tadpole in my brain. Another example is when you first meet Will and he tells you about the demon Karlach, or when you first meet Karlach and the paladins hunting her. The knights implore you to kill the devil Karlach, who is hiding near the river below the inn they're currently at because she's killed some refugees or whatever. On top of that, like I said before, if you talk to Will or have him in your party already, he also happens to be hunting Karlach. So if you take the paladins at their word and don't believe Karlach's story when you talk to her, as well as don't do any snooping around to discover some clues, you could end up completing the quest by killing Karlach. However, you could also side with Karlach and kill the paladins. But the point I'm trying to make here with either scenario is that whatever decision you decide to make in that situation, in that scenario, it could drastically affect the story and the future options that you have. The story unfolds based on not only your dialogue options, but also your actions. And it's because of this that you never feel corralled or forced into following a particular path. You can easily promise an NPC one thing and then do the opposite, or agree to hunt down and kill someone for some quick cash only to change your mind once you manage to find that person and they plead their case. And it's specifically this type of storytelling that makes games like The Witcher 3, Fallout New Vegas, Undertale, or Larian Studios' previous game, Divinity Original Sin 2, such amazing games. And Baldur's Gate 3 is no exception. The way that the story slowly unfolds and respects each decision you make is amazing. And the best part about it is that even if you fuck up and pick a fight with someone you probably shouldn't have, or kill a crucial NPC, or decide halfway through the campaign you actually want to be a villain, the game respects that and doesn't break down or prevent you from doing something, at least not without a good reason. So for example, did you come across an NPC with a really big cool sword that you like, and you happen to be a barbarian who likes big cool swords, so you decide to kill him and take his sword because he wasn't going to give it to you willingly? Well, you can do that. Sure, it might mess up a quest they gave you, or make a group of NPCs hostile towards you that previously weren't hostile, but hey, if you're up for the challenge and you're okay with that, then you can definitely do it because you're allowed to and the game gives you that freedom. And speaking of NPCs, Baldur's Gate 3 has some of the best NPC questline and storylines out of any video game I've ever played. Well, maybe except for Minsk, since he doesn't really have a questline in Baldur's Gate 3, or at least as far as I know.
Oh, the mind of Minsk is a simple place.
Each one of your party members has a questline that feels genuine and is super rewarding to complete. And of course, if you want to get down and dirty with one of them, then that's also an option, I guess.
Your scent alone is enough to make my neck sweat and my hairs stand on end.
What? What the fuck?
Not until I can be sure I won't burn you. Gods, I want to ride you till you see stars.
On top of that, depending on the NPCs you have with you, sometimes your party members will interject into a conversation, or they'll be leading the conversation. You can either choose to add to it or decide to remain quiet. Plus, sometimes your party members will just begin talking with one another as you're exploring the world and asking about each other's backstories or poking fun at one another, which breathes so much life into them and adds so much more depth to the game and obviously the NPCs that you're traveling with. And it's because of these relationships that you make and build with your fellow party members, as well as other NPCs you meet throughout the campaign, that influence each and every decision you make and perhaps make you think twice about succumbing to evil. All of this culminates throughout the campaign to deliver you an absolutely fantastic story, complete with mystery, romance, heartbreak, deceit, thrillingly epic battles, and of course a fantastic ending that changes depending on the decisions you've made throughout the campaign. Overall, the story for Baldur's Gate 3 is a triumph. The NPCs and their stories are beautifully crafted, the world of the Forgotten Realms is as intriguing as ever, and the game never forces you into a particular moral direction with your choices. Baldur's Gate 3 makes you the master of your own story. It never tries to rip the reins away from you, and it never tries to force you down a particular path. And that's what makes the story so amazing. You feel like you're crafting it with your own decisions. It doesn't feel predetermined. But now that we've talked about the story, let's move on and talk about the gameplay. So Baldur's Gate 3 is a turn-based RPG with a lot of strategy and mechanics involved, and because of this, I found myself forgetting a lot of the tips and tricks and tools and mechanics that they taught you at the very beginning of the game via tooltips and pop-ups. Things like right-clicking on something and examining it to learn about their resistances, or you can separate your party and move each other individually even during dialogue. Or you can hold down the Alt key to see everything that's lying around on the ground. But people who aren't familiar with Larian's style of game might not understand how much freedom you have with your character. You can fly up to the top of buildings or jump off a bridge onto the ledge below if you want to. And for me, when I played my first Larian Studios game back with Divinity Original Sin 2, it took me a little bit to realize how much freedom they give you in terms of being able to move your character around the world and interact with it in so many unique ways. And speaking of combat, some of my friends have expressed to me that the combat hotbar is a bit daunting, especially if you haven't played a game like Larian Studios or another RPG that has a massive hotbar like that before. But in my experience at least, I've found that once you get past your first couple of combat encounters, it becomes pretty natural and you really get the hang of using the hotbar and your abilities. And speaking of enemies and abilities, the game is based on D&D 5e's game system, so if you're familiar with D&D, you will pretty much be an expert when it comes to knowing what your actions, abilities, and spells do, as well as perhaps some of the enemies that you'll be facing. However, with that being said, while they did use D&D as the core system for Baldur's Gate 3, they did have to tweak or remove altogether some rules from D&D 5e to make it play better on a PC. So here are some of the ones that I noticed the most during my playthrough. The first of which was the maximum level for a character is level 12, when in D&D it's level 20. The second of which was shoving, jumping, and drinking a potion are all bonus actions, when in D&D, those are normally actions as per the base rules. And then the third one was long rests require camp supplies. When in D&D, it normally just kind of happens whenever your party wants, as long as it's roughly 24 hours after the last time they long rested, and of course as long as your dungeon master allows it. Number 4 though is you can only short rest twice per day, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And number 5, multiclassing ignores any ability score requirements you'd normally need. And number 6, you obviously can't freely examine things to learn their resistances and traits in D&D 5e like you can in Baldur's Gate 3. But let's talk about these changes because I actually think it's kind of interesting being a big D&D nerd. So I've seen a couple people complain about the changes that Larian Studios has made to D&D to make it applicable to Baldur's Gate 3 and play better on a PC, but in my opinion, I honestly think these changes are great and play really well. In fact, I actually really like the changes that they made to the resting mechanic. Having only 2 short rests per long rest feels like plenty to me, and I honestly can't think of a time when a group of mine has short rested more than twice a day anyways. That, but also needing camp supplies in order to long rest seems like a good mechanic to me. So food for thought, let's say that you need a minimum of 1 ration to complete a long rest. Well, that would make sense because obviously we were supposed to mark off a ration per day anyway, so it'd be a good way to keep track of them. But also, I don't know about you guys, at least those of you who play D&D, but in my D&D campaigns, generally rations are those things that players always forget that they have, like, oh shoot, right, I should be marking off my rations. How many days has it been? I'll mark off 5. Does that sound good, GM? And the GMs are like, yeah, sure, I don't care. Because they're normally pretty cheap anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but it's just an interesting mechanic, I think, that could also translate well to a D&D game, so just food for thought. And regarding the max level, I wish it was higher than 12, but I understand why Larian Studios made it 12, because obviously if they increased it to say the max in D&D, which is level 20, that would make the game literally 100 hours long average, and on top of that, level 20 characters in D&D are absolutely gods basically, so it would make fighting some of the monsters pretty easy in regards to the monsters that you fight in Baldur's Gate 3, and I know that some of the monsters are pretty strong, but level 20 D&D characters are, like I said, basically gods, so it would make encounters pretty easy unless of course you threw in literal gods or other sort of massive monsters in the game, which I hope they do if they ever end up making a Baldur's Gate 4. But besides those changes, I honestly don't have an issue with any of the other changes that they made to the game, because some of them were really small and inconsequential, or at least in my opinion, or I thought that the changes that they did make made sense for it being a PC game. And we kind of talked about this before, but you can't talk about gameplay without talking about the D20 dice mechanic that Larian Studios added to Baldur's Gate 3 to make interacting with the world around you and dialogue choices feel so much more satisfying when you succeed at them. So like I just said, I've already kind of touched on this earlier in the video, but I just want to reiterate how cool of a mechanic the D20 rolling system is in Baldur's Gate 3. It's simple, but it adds so much life to the game and captures a portion of that thrill you get when playing D&D and you roll a dice to see if you succeeded at a particular check. While not all checks in the game bring up the D20 tab, most of the important ones do. And I gotta say, there is something really satisfying about seeing all of my modifiers add up to a success, and I get to hear that really satisfying success sound effect. And on top of that, I love how the game rolls perception, survival, and insight checks automatically for you, so that when you're wandering around and you hear the little clickety-clack dice roll noise accompanied by the success or failure noise, you instantly stop and begin to look around at whatever you found or missed. And I don't know about you guys, but there were definitely times during my playthrough when I would have my camera super far ahead of my characters and I'd be pathing somewhere and I'd hear the little clickety-clack dice roll sound effect accompanied by tons of failure sound effects, and I'd be like, oh shit, what the hell just happened? Only to go back and see that my character has triggered a trap or something. And I will say regarding insight checks, I wish that they happened more often, or you had the ability in dialogue more often to insight somebody, because there were tons of times when your character would just take what an NPC said at face value and you weren't really allowed to insight check, at least as far as I know. And something else that I really love about Baldur's Gate 3, and I consider to be a breath of fresh air, is that there's no microtransactions or a season pass or anything like that, which I think is pretty, or at least I feel like is pretty rare in most games that are released nowadays. And lastly, regarding bugs and glitches, I honestly didn't experience very many glitches or bugs during my playthrough. There were some times when a cutscene would seem kinda slightly delayed, or the camera would cut to a viewpoint right behind my character's neck and I couldn't see the NPC talking or something like that, or it would cut directly below the person speaking and like looking at their chin. But besides that, I never really experienced any game-breaking or frustrating bugs, whether it be during combat or when I was exploring the world of the Forgotten Realms. Overall, I think that the game is fairly technical, especially for new players. And the game has a lot of things and mechanics that you need to keep track of as the player, whether it be how many actions you have left, the conditions currently ailing you, the spells that you have access to, or what abilities you have, and so forth. There is a lot of things that you would need to keep track of during combat and when you're exploring, but in my opinion at least, it's nice because the game slowly eases you into it. You don't just start off with tons of things that you have to keep track of. So it becomes very manageable, especially by the end of the game. And in my personal opinion, I think that the mechanics and the way that the game plays is done wonderfully and is extremely addictive. But I'm interested to hear what you guys thought about the gameplay and perhaps some contrasts to D&D or some things perhaps you didn't like about the game. Let me know in the comments down below because it's always interesting to hear you guys' perspective. But let's move on now to our last category, which is going to be talking about the looks, visuals, and sounds and music of the game. Holy shit, the soundtrack and the sound effects that this game has are amazing. I gotta say that no matter what class you end up playing, you will be treated to some awesome sound effects. During my first playthrough, I was a bard, and when I discovered that you could find or purchase other instruments, and those instruments changed the sound of your bardic inspiration, your spells, and everything, and played a different version of the base bard songs that you get, I was ecstatic. The amount of detail that Larian Studios puts into each class feature, ability, and spell is extremely commendable. Whether it be a deep, bassy rage sound effect, or a magical healing spell, the sound effects never get old. There are of course some repeat sound effects or animations, but I found them hardly noticeable until I actually stopped and looked at them all. On top of that, a small little detail that I really liked is that when a player or a creature or character whatever casts a spell, that word stays consistent no matter who's casting it. So for example, with Firebolt, they say like Ignis or Ignis or whatever, and it's consistent and no matter who's casting the spell, which is a nice little detail that I just happened to notice. But let's talk about the soundtrack. Firstly, I love how the menu of the game starts off super peaceful and calm with this view of Baldur's Gate, and then transitions to the evil, dark interior of the Temple of Baal with a deep bassy chants. Whether it be adventuring through the peaceful wilds, crawling through a sewer, or fighting a freaking devil in his own house, the soundtrack is always spot on. And on that note, I cannot express how genius it was to have this subtle track playing in the background the entire time you're wandering around the House of Hope, and then when you finally face down Raphael, I was so giddy with excitement when I heard the soundtrack that I've been hearing this entire time actually get vocals and this absolute badass banger of a unique track that starts playing when the fight starts. But now let's talk about the visuals for Baldur's Gate 3, which are also amazing. No matter where I was in the game, whether it be in the wilderness, or in the Cursed Lands, or the Underdark, or in Baldur's Gate itself, I found myself always moving the camera around to witness the beauty of the world that Larian Studios has delivered so well with Baldur's Gate 3. The amount of detail that is put into every single corner of this game is absolutely commendable. No matter where you are, you will always be astonished by the amount of detail for every single texture, or dungeon, or crate. No matter what, it is always so well done and so well polished. No matter where you are in the game or what you're doing, there is always an immense amount of polish and detail to everything, whether it be the NPC you're currently talking to or exploring a hag's lair. There is so much little details and knickknacks and things placed everywhere to add beautifully to this atmosphere that you are currently witnessing. And there were so many times when I would be exploring the world of the Forgotten Realms that's in Baldur's Gate 3, and moving my camera around only to find something hidden by the fog of war, and discover a fun random encounter, or a hidden treasure, or a secret lever that opens a hidden passage, or you name it. And something about how the way the camera works with Baldur's Gate 3 adds so much to the cinematography of it all. Being able to move your camera ahead of your party and watch from afar as they traverse a cliffside in front of an ancient temple, or wander the shadowy halls of a crypt, makes you feel like you're the cameraman for a group of legendary badasses. There were so many times during my playthrough when I would stop and admire the beauty of the game and the scenery around me, or zoom in to geek out over some of the monster character models that I was fighting against, or the spells that my characters were casting. The visuals for Baldur's Gate 3 are immaculate, whether it be the character models or the world around you, and each time I moved on to a new part of the game and left the previous section behind, I found myself super excited to see what new visuals and landscapes the game had in store for me. From the perspective of a D&D nerd or a dungeon master, this game is amazing, and if you're a big fan of D&D as well, I cannot heavily recommend this game enough. I cannot express the amount of excitement and joy I had with each and every encounter or each monster or scenario that I came across. Especially being a person who knows a lot about D&D lore, it was so satisfying to see how well they handled everything. As a D&D fan, I cannot express the amount of joy and excitement I had when the game first opened up with the scene with the Illithid being attacked by the Githyanki on the Nautiloid. I just kept thinking to myself, no way they're gonna start the game off with you fighting a freaking Illithid, a challenge rating 7 monster. Oh, and also, that's another point. I guess I've been saying Illithid or Illithid wrong this whole time, because I thought it was Illithid, but I guess it's Illithid. But I guess as per the game and maybe the correct pronunciation, it's Illithid, but Larian Studios has done a wonderful job of staying true to D&D's Forgotten Realms canon, and the intricate lore therein. And the amount of excitement that I had seeing monsters, characters, and locations that I've read about or used in my own D&D games get such a fantastic video game adaptation was unmeasurable. I also wanted to mention that if you're considering playing this game with your friends, definitely do it, because in my experience, playing this with my friends was some of the most fun I've had playing video games in a hot minute. In the first session of us playing the game, I was knocked unconscious by a friendly Arms of Adar attack, I was shoved or pushed more times than I can count, Lae'zel was killed because one of my friends thought that she was an enemy, and when we were talking to the druids, one of my friends was walking around basically stealing everyone's pocket change and anything not tied down. And then to end off the first session, one of my friends pushed one of the tieflings off one of the cliffs to then start this massive fight between us and basically everyone in the druid area, which of course we died from. But it was a funny experience, you know, a classic D&D shenanigan experience. But being able to explore the streets of a grand city like Baldur's Gate, steal from a magic shop, hunt down a hag, enter a Myconid colony, or see the shadowy figure of a Dryder emerge from the shadows, these are all experiences that I've given to my players before, and now Larian Studios is able to give that same experience to so many new players who may have never even played D&D before. Baldur's Gate 3 runs the game like a good GM. It rewards players being thorough in creative solutions and encourages you to think outside the box. The game doesn't force a particular type of playstyle on the player. There is almost always more than one solution to every situation, and there's not just one ending. The game doesn't force a particular type of playstyle on you as the player. You have the complete freedom to do whatever the hell you want. And there is almost always more than one solution to every situation and encounter. So for example, if you make your way to the goblin camp, you can either sneak your way in by saying you're a part of the Absolute, or perhaps you want to fight your way in and just break down the front doors. Or perhaps if you want to be more stealthy, you can sneak in and poison one of the barrels that they're drinking from, thus incapacitating everyone in the outside camp. Baldur's Gate 3 is a love letter from Larian Studios to the RPG community. Everything from the NPCs, to the story, to the dungeons, to combat. Everything is done beautifully. And Larian Studios should be proud of what they've created. Baldur's Gate 3 is a triumph of an RPG. And even with all the amazing games that have been released in 2023 so far, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is a titan of a competitor for Game of the Year. So, there you have it. That is why Baldur's Gate 3 is considered by myself and many others to be a masterpiece. But with that, let me know what you guys think. Did you guys like Baldur's Gate 3? Have you finished the game, or are you still in your first playthrough? What were some of your highlights of playing the game? It's always really interesting to read your guys' comments. But anyways, everybody, thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, I will be sure to catch you in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.